My name is Helen Carter. I'm 66 years old, and I'm a retired nurse who thought she had seen every kind of heartbreak in life. But nothing prepared me for the night I opened my daughter's closet. I had only gone in to hang up a sweater she'd left in the laundry. The faint smell of lavender drifted from her clothes, and for a moment, I felt like I was trespassing. Then I saw an old cardboard box tucked behind shoeboxes and handbags. My name was written across the lid in thick black marker, Helen. My heart hammered as if someone had grabbed it with cold fingers. Why would Emily, my only daughter, keep a box labeled with my name hidden away? With trembling hands, I slid it out. The weight of it startled me. It wasn't empty. My breath caught as I reached to lift the lid. And just then, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Emily was coming. Panic surged through me. I shoved the box back, closed the closet, and forced myself to smile as the doorknob rattled. But in that split second, I knew nothing between us would ever be the same. That moment haunted me all night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing my late husband's voice in memory. "Take care of her, Helen. She's our pride." For decades I had. I poured everything into Emily, every dollar, every ounce of strength, every piece of my soul. After Robert died, I worked extra shifts just to keep her in college. I sold my jewelry to help with her first car. I drained my savings so she and Mark could put down a deposit on their home. I told myself that was what mothers did. And for a long time, I believed Emily loved me for it. But lately, there were cracks. Emily's smile had become sharper, her hugs shorter. She kept her door closed more often. When I asked if she needed groceries, she said Mark would handle it. When I offered to babysit their plans for a future child, she laughed as if I were being naive. And now this hidden box with my name scrawled across it, as though I was an object to be filed away. The next morning, I made coffee, the bitter taste sharper than usual. The house felt colder, emptier. I replayed last night over and over, the feel of cardboard under my fingers, the sound of her footsteps, the terror that she would catch me. What was in that box? Letters? Documents? Something she didn't want me to see? A part of me wanted to forget it, to shove the memory into a corner like Emily had shoved that box. But another part of me, harder, sharper, newly awake, knew this was the start of something bigger. I looked at the framed photo on my kitchen wall. Emily at 6 years old, missing her front teeth, holding a birthday cake, while Robert and I smiled behind her. My throat tightened. How had that little girl turned into a woman who hid secrets from her mother? My pulse quickened with a mix of sorrow and dread, because deep down I already sensed the answer. The box was not just clutter. It was a message, a warning, and I had to know what was inside, no matter the cost. That day, I carried on as if nothing had happened. I cooked, I watered the plants, I answered Emily's polite questions with polite answers. But in my chest, the question burned hotter and hotter. Why was my name on that box? And why did Emily look at me with that distant, careful expression, as if she knew a storm was coming? The sound of Emily's footsteps still echoed in my head long after that night. I couldn't unsee the box, the way my name was written in thick black marker, as though I were an item to be stored away rather than her mother. I went to bed shaken, and by the time morning came, the unease had settled deep in my bones. That was the beginning. The moment I realized my daughter was no longer the little girl I had once cradled in my arms, but a stranger hiding something from me. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands trembling slightly as I set the mug down on the table. The steam curled in the air like ghosts of memories past. And as I stared at the bitter liquid, my mind drifted back to the long path that had led me here. I was 25 when Emily was born. Robert, my husband, had stood beside me in the hospital room, eyes wet with tears as he kissed my forehead. He whispered, "She's our miracle, Helen." And she was. For years, she filled our small home with laughter and chaos, the sound of her running down the hallway with pigtails bouncing, the way she clutched her stuffed rabbit at night, the joy in her voice when she called out, "Mommy, look!" When Robert died unexpectedly, Emily was just a teenager. The grief nearly destroyed me, but I told myself I had to keep going for her. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, sometimes working double through the night, just to keep her clothed and fed. I remember standing in the grocery store, calculating whether I could afford meat that week, while Emily tossed her favorite snacks into the cart. I never said no. I couldn't bear to disappoint her. College was the next mountain. Tuition bills arrived like thunderclaps, each one heavier than the last. I sold Robert's watch, the one he had left me, to cover her books. I pawned my wedding ring for the down payment on her dorm. When she walked across that stage in her cap and gown, I cried not just from pride but from relief, telling myself all those sacrifices had been worth it. But love sometimes blinds you. When Emily met Mark, I wanted so badly to believe he was good for her. He was charming, a man with sharp suits and an easy smile. "Your daughter deserves the world," he told me once. I nodded, desperate to believe him. But over time, I noticed how his words carried edges, how his charm dimmed when he thought no one was watching. Still, I told myself, if Emily loves him, I must accept him. I thought I was building her a future. Instead, I was slowly dismantling my own. After she married Mark, she and I drifted further apart. They needed help with the mortgage, I gave it. They needed furniture, I provided. When their car broke down, I wrote another check. My savings dwindled, my retirement shrank, but I told myself this was family, this was what mothers did. Yet something shifted in Emily. Her tone grew cooler, her gratitude thinner. I noticed her eyes flicking toward Mark whenever I offered money, as though waiting for his approval. There were dinners where she barely looked at me, birthdays where her hug felt like a formality, and still, I clung to the hope that underneath it all, she was still my little girl. That's why the box terrified me. It wasn't just a cardboard container with my name written on it. It was a symbol of distance, of secrets, of something rotten festering between us. The realization burned through me that maybe, just maybe, I had given too much, trusted too blindly. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, jotting down the sums of what I had spent over the years: tuition, car loans, house repairs, endless emergencies. The numbers blurred together, forming a mountain of sacrifice. I told myself it didn't matter, that love had no price tag. But then I remembered the look in Emily's eyes when she saw me near her closet, a flash of anger, almost of fear. Not the look of a daughter toward her mother, the look of someone guarding a secret. I closed the notebook with a sharp snap. My chest ached, but my resolve hardened. Whatever was in that box, it was tied to me. My name was written on it. And I wasn't going to let it sit in the shadows forever. I sipped the last of my coffee, the taste gone cold and bitter. Outside the window, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside, I felt a shift, like the ground beneath me had cracked. For years, I had lived for Emily, pouring every ounce of myself into her future. But now, for the first time, I realized I might have to live for myself. And yet, a mother's heart is stubborn. Even as I steeled myself, a part of me whispered, "Maybe you're imagining it, Helen. Maybe it's just old photographs, a keepsake box." But another part, the part that remembered Mark's sharp smile and Emily's cold glance, knew better. The box was not a keepsake. It was a warning. And one way or another, I would discover the truth. The days that followed felt heavy, as if every corner of the house carried a secret. I tried to go about my routine, watering the garden, folding laundry, reading the newspaper, but the image of that box gnawed at me relentlessly. My name is written in thick, black ink, the weight of it when I slid it out from the shadows. What could Emily possibly be hiding? At dinner one evening, I sat across from Emily and Mark, forcing a smile as I passed the bowl of potatoes. Emily barely met my eyes. Mark, as usual, filled the silence with talk about his cases, boasting of clients and victories in the courtroom. His words washed over me, sharp and smug, but my mind was elsewhere. I caught Emily's glance when I mentioned how quiet the house had become lately. For the briefest moment, her lips pressed into a thin line, and I felt a chill. Later that night, I stood in the hallway, meaning to say goodnight to her. Their door was closed, but muffled voices drifted through. I paused, not out of malice, but out of a gnawing need to understand what was happening to my own daughter. "She suspects something," Emily's voice whispered, low but urgent. "Of course she does," Mark replied, his tone dismissive. "She's not blind, but she can't do anything about it." Emily sighed, the sound of it heavy, almost pained. "I hate hiding it. You want that house, don't you? You want security? Then stay quiet," Mark snapped. My stomach twisted. I pressed my back against the wall, barely daring to breathe. The words echoed through me, cutting deeper than any blade. What did they mean? What couldn't I do anything about? And why was my name, my life, a secret they whispered behind closed doors? I crept back to my room, my pulse thundering in my ears. The house, once a place of warmth and safety, suddenly felt foreign, as though its very walls had turned against me. The next morning, Emily greeted me with her usual smile, but it no longer looked like love. It looked like a mask. I studied her face as she poured herself coffee, wondering if she realized how sharp her edges had become. I remembered the little girl who once clung to me after nightmares, begging me not to leave the room. And I wondered when that child had disappeared. Mark left for work early, his briefcase swinging at his side, his shoulders straight with arrogance. Emily lingered in the kitchen. "Are you doing okay, Mom?" she asked, her tone sweet, but her eyes darting quickly to my hands, as though checking for something. I forced a smile. "I'm fine." She tilted her head, emotion so small but so calculated. "You seem distracted." Distracted, the word stung. Distracted was the polite term for suspicious, for nosy, for perhaps even dangerous to her plans. I set my cup down with a firmness that surprised even me. "I've been thinking a lot, Emily, about family, about trust. For a flicker of a moment, guilt crossed her face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "That's good," she said smoothly, before changing the subject. When she left the room, I sat in silence, gripping the edge of the table. My daughter was hiding something connected to me, to my name, to that box, and Mark was pulling the strings. The realization cut into me with brutal clarity. I was no longer part of their family in the way I once believed. I was an obstacle. That night, as I lay awake, the whispers returned to my mind. "You want that house, don't you? Stay quiet." The words had meaning. The box wasn't just clutter, it wasn't just old keepsakes. It was a tool, a weapon, something they were preparing to use. And yet, even in my fear, another feeling grew inside me. Anger. Anger at myself for giving so much. Anger at Emily for turning into someone I could barely recognize. Anger at Mark for poisoning what little bond we had left. I turned over in bed, staring into the dark. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The box was more than a secret, it was the key to unraveling everything. Tomorrow, I decided, I would find out the truth. But as I whispered that vow into the night, I had no idea that the truth waiting for me was darker than I could imagine. The next morning dawned gray, a heavy stillness hanging in the air. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, the scent of brewing coffee doing little to comfort me. My mind replayed the whispers I had overheard, Emily's anxious tone, Mark's cold reassurance. Their words had carved a hole inside me, and no amount of routine could fill it. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood, but deep down I knew better. My daughter was hiding something. As I sat at the kitchen table, my eyes fell on a framed photograph propped on the counter. Emily, at age 7, had a toothless grin wide as she held a cake I had baked the night before her birthday. I remembered staying up until 3 in the morning, stitching together a princess costume because she had begged me to. Her joy had been my reward, the sparkle in her eyes enough to erase the exhaustion of my double shifts at the hospital. Back then she had clung to me. Whenever she had nightmares, she'd crawl into my bed whispering, "Don't leave me, Mommy." I would stroke her hair until she drifted back to sleep. Those moments had been my anchor after Robert's death, proof that love could keep me going when grief threatened to swallow me whole. But those days felt like another lifetime. Now Emily's voice carried sharp edges, her gaze avoiding mine, her warmth replaced with a coldness that made me shiver. I tried to pinpoint when it had changed. Was it during college when she started leaning on my money more than my advice? Or was it when she met Mark, who seemed to draw her further from me with each passing year? The memories hurt, but they also lit a fire inside me. I had given so much, sacrificed vacations, pawned jewelry, sold heirlooms to make sure she had everything. I had stood proud at her graduation, clutching a bouquet of roses, tears streaming down my face as if all those years of labor had been worth it. I had smiled at her wedding, even as Mark's smug grin made my stomach turn, telling myself love meant acceptance. And yet, here I was, treated like a stranger in my own child's life, worse than a stranger, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. That afternoon, Mrs. Patel stopped by. She had been my neighbor for nearly 20 years, a retired teacher with gentle eyes and a voice like soft silk. She handed me a jar of her homemade chutney and noticed the tension etched into my face. "Helen, are you all right? You look unsettled." I hesitated. Telling anyone what I had found felt dangerous, as though saying it aloud would make it too real. But something in her kind expression loosened the knot in my chest. "It's Emily," I whispered. "She's different, and I found something I wasn't supposed to." Mrs. Patel touched my hand. "Children change, Helen, but a mother's love doesn't. Don't let fear eat you alive. Face it." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Face it. I couldn't live in the shadows of suspicion forever. If Emily and Mark were plotting something, I had to know exactly what it was. That night, I walked past Emily's room and paused. The door was cracked, light spilling into the hallway. Voices again. My breath caught as I edged closer. "She's more curious lately," Emily murmured. "She won't get far," Mark replied. "We'll make sure no one believes her. Just a little longer and everything will be in place." I froze, my heart hammering so loudly I feared they would hear it through the door. They were planning something, and it was tied to me. Back in my room, I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't just tears of sorrow, they were tears of fury. For years I had blurred the lines, convincing myself that love meant sacrifice, that giving meant belonging. But now, for the first time, I saw the truth. I wasn't family to them anymore. I was a resource, a means to an end. And yet, even as rage coursed through me, another emotion lingered: grief. Grief for the little girl who once adored me, who once needed me. That daughter was gone, replaced by a woman whose secrets could destroy me. I wiped my eyes, sat up, and whispered to the empty room, "I won't let you erase me, Emily. Not now, not ever." But what I didn't know then was that the box I feared and the secrets it contained would soon explode into my life with consequences I could never have imagined. For days, I lived in a state of restless silence, moving through the house with a calm face but carrying a storm inside. Every sound seemed sharper: the creak of a floorboard, the slam of a cupboard, even the hum of the refrigerator. Each one reminded me of that box in Emily's closet, sitting there like a coiled snake, waiting. I couldn't stop thinking about my name written across the lid, bold and inescapable. The whispers I had overheard from Emily and Mark gnawed at me. "We'll make sure no one believes her." Those words played like a broken record in my head. They weren't just hiding something, they were preparing for a war I hadn't agreed to fight. And yet, I was already in it. One Thursday afternoon, I found my chance. Emily and Mark had both left for the day, Mark to his office, Emily to run errands. The house was silent. My pulse quickened as I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. I paused at the top, straining my ears. Nothing but the faint tick of the hallway clock. I stood before Emily's door, my hand trembling on the knob. For a moment, guilt stabbed at me. What kind of mother sneaks into her daughter's room? But then the memory of Emily's cold stare, of Mark's sharp words, returned with force. This wasn't about prying, it was about survival. I opened the door slowly, the faint scent of Emily's perfume lingering in the air. The room was neat, too neat, as though arranged for a magazine photo. I crossed to the closet, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. There it was, tucked in the corner where I had first found it, the box with my name. This time I didn't hesitate. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the carpet, and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of envelopes, bound with rubber bands. My breath caught as I recognized the handwriting: mine. Old birthday cards I had written to Emily. The letters I had sent when she was away at school. Notes scribbled on the backs of grocery lists. She had kept them all. For a fleeting moment, warmth bloomed in my chest. Perhaps this was nothing sinister at all, just a daughter keeping mementos of her mother. But beneath the letters was something else. Thick folders, labeled in Mark's precise handwriting. I pulled one open and felt the color drain from my face. Inside were financial statements, my accounts, my pension, even records of the house. Pages upon pages, highlighted and annotated. My hands shook as I flipped through. There were lists of my assets, notes about transfer of power of attorney, even legal drafts I had never seen before. And at the bottom, a printed guardianship petition with my name across the top. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle the cry that threatened to escape. They were planning to take everything, my money, my house, even my right to make decisions for myself. To the world, they wanted to paint me as incapable, unstable, in need of their control. At the very bottom of the box, hidden under the files, was a photograph. I picked it up, my chest tightening. It was me, standing in the garden last spring, watering my roses. The picture had been taken through the window without my knowledge. I dropped it as if it burned. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The letters, the files, the photo, they weren't keepsakes. They were evidence. Evidence against me. I shoved everything back into the box, my fingers clumsy, my vision blurred with tears. My mind screamed at me to leave it alone, to close the lid and pretend none of this existed. But my heart, pounding with both fear and fury, knew better. If I didn't act now, I would lose everything. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me back to reality. Panic shot through me. Emily was home early. I stuffed the folders back into place, slammed the lid shut, and pushed the box into the closet with all my strength. I barely had time to stand and brush off my clothes before I heard the front door open. "Mom?" Emily's voice floated up the stairs, sweet and casual, but it made my blood run cold. I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice. "Yes, dear? I'm just tidying up." Footsteps creaked on the stairs, each one bringing her closer. My heart raced, but I forced myself to smile as she appeared in the doorway. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp and assessing, before settling on me. "What are you doing in here?" she asked lightly, but there was steel beneath her words. I held her gaze, summoning every ounce of courage I had left. "Just looking for a sweater I thought I left behind." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't go through my things, Mom." Her tone was soft, almost gentle, but I heard the threat buried inside it. I nodded, pretending to be embarrassed, though inside my chest a storm was raging. I had seen enough to know the truth. That night, as I lay awake, one thought repeated in my mind. If Emily and Mark wanted war, I was done hiding. I would not go quietly into their trap. I would fight. The tension between Emily and me grew thicker with each passing day. I tried to mask my unease, but she noticed. She was sharper now, always watching me, always gauging my reactions. Every word she spoke carried a second meaning, and every smile looked painted on. I knew she suspected I had gone through her things again, and though I tried to act as if nothing had changed, my nerves betrayed me. It was over dinner when the first crack split open. I had cooked pot roast, Emily's childhood favorite, thinking perhaps a taste of the past might soften the wall between us. She picked at her plate, barely touching the food. Mark sat at the head of the table, swirling his wine glass with the air of a man certain he owned the room. "You've been quiet lately, Mom," Emily said suddenly, her fork clinking against her plate. "Is something bothering you?" I froze, the question landing like a trap. "I've just been tired," I answered carefully. "Nothing more." Mark chuckled softly, his tone edged with mockery. "Tired? Or distracted? You've been acting strange." I set down my knife, my heart pounding. "Strange? In what way?" He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Roaming the house when we're not home. Poking around in places you don't belong. That's not normal, Helen." Emily's eyes flicked toward him, then back to me. "Mark," she said gently, though her voice lacked conviction. "Mom's always been curious. Haven't you, Mom?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Curious isn't the same as unstable. Don't twist it." Mark smirked, sipping his wine. "We're not twisting anything. We're just concerned. You've seemed paranoid lately." The word cut through me like a knife. Paranoid. That's what they were planning to say in court, I realized. They were rehearsing their narrative, practicing their lines right in front of me. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. "I've worked my entire life for this family. I've given you everything: money, time, sacrifices you'll never understand. And now you sit here in my house and call me paranoid?" Emily flinched, her lips trembling, but Mark's expression remained cold. "We're only worried about you," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe it's time someone else helped you manage things." "Helped me?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Or did they take control of me? Don't you dare patronize me." Emily's eyes welled with tears. For a moment, I thought I saw the little girl I once knew, the one who used to cling to me after nightmares. But then Mark reached over and touched her hand, and just like that, the cold mask returned. She whispered, "Mom, if you keep going down this path, you'll regret it." The silence that followed was suffocating. I stared at her, my chest tight with grief and fury. "Regret?" I whispered back. "The only regret I have is raising a daughter who treats her mother like a burden instead of a blessing." Mark slammed his glass on the table, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "That's enough," he barked. "This conversation is over." I rose slowly, my hands trembling, but my spine straight. "No, Mark, this is only the beginning." I left the dining room, my heart hammering, and shut myself in my bedroom. My reflection in the mirror startled me, my eyes blazing, my cheeks flushed with anger. I barely recognized the woman staring back. The truth was undeniable now. They weren't simply whispering behind doors. They were preparing to strip me of everything I had left: my dignity, my independence, my name. The box wasn't just a symbol of betrayal, it was their blueprint for destroying me. I sat at my desk, pulling out a notebook. My hand shook as I began to write. Every payment I had made for Emily's education, every loan I had covered, every emergency I had solved. The numbers piled up into a damning record of sacrifice. I wasn't paranoid. I was exploited. And if they wanted to challenge me, I would not face them with tears, I would face them with evidence. When I finally set down the pen, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in weeks, I had direction. I was no longer the helpless mother staring at a closed closet door. I was a woman preparing for battle. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, I whispered to myself, "If they want a war, I'll give them one." But I didn't yet know how far they were willing to go or how ruthless they could be. The morning after our explosive dinner, the house was eerily quiet. Emily had gone to work early, and Mark's car was already gone from the driveway. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the notebook from the night before open in front of me. The inked pages stared back like scars carved into paper: tuition, car loans, mortgage payments, groceries, furniture, all of it mine, all of it given in the name of love. But love wasn't what stared back at me from Emily's eyes anymore. It was a calculation, distance, a strange hardness that didn't belong to the little girl I raised. I tapped the pen against the notebook, my jaw tight. I couldn't ignore what I had seen in that box: my financial records, legal drafts, and most chilling of all, that guardianship petition. It was no longer a question of if, it was happening. They were preparing to strip me of my freedom, to declare me unfit to handle my own life. Still, I needed proof. The memory of Mark's smug smirk and Emily's whispered warnings replayed in my mind. She's paranoid. She's unstable. If I wasn't careful, they'd use every word, every move against me. That afternoon, I decided to search the house, not recklessly, but carefully, deliberately. If they were building a case against me, then I would build one of my own. I started studying. Dust clung to the corners, and the faint smell of Mark's cologne lingered in the air. On the desk, I found a file drawer locked tight. My pulse quickened. After a few minutes of rummaging, I discovered a spare key taped beneath the drawer. With trembling fingers, I unlocked it. Inside were folders labeled in neat handwriting. I pulled one out: bills, contracts, and receipts, all tied to me. My pension deposits, my property taxes, and even small transactions from my checking account. Each page had notes scribbled in the margins. On one document, Mark had underlined the words "mental decline" and written beside it, "erratic spending, confusion, needs oversight." My stomach churned. Erratic spending? I had bought groceries and fixed the roof. Confusion? I managed the household on my own, perfectly fine. This wasn't oversight. They were twisting my life into evidence of incompetence. I shoved the file back, my chest burning with a mix of fury and betrayal. That evening, Emily returned home. I forced a smile, but the mask felt heavier than ever. She set her purse down, glanced at me, and asked, "Have you been resting, Mom?" Resting. The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension, as if I were a child who needed managing. I bit back the anger, replying evenly, "I've been fine." but I noticed her eyes flick to the notebook on the table before she quickly looked away. She knew. She sensed I was piecing things together. Later, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was low, but the words were clear enough. "Yes, Mark, she's definitely suspicious. We'll have to move faster." My heart clenched. Move faster. The timeline had shifted. Whatever they were planning, it was coming soon. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, staring at the shadows crawling across the ceiling. The image of that photograph from the box me, watering my roses, taken in secret, flashed before my eyes. How many moments of my life had they been documenting, twisting into their narrative of a frail, paranoid old woman? I got up before dawn, brewed strong coffee, and sat again at the kitchen table. The notebook lay open, waiting. I began writing down not only the money I had given, but also every moment that proved my clarity, my independence, managing bills, handling repairs, attending my garden club, volunteering at the community center. Each line was proof that I was not the woman they claimed I was. By the time sunlight poured through the window, my fear had cooled into resolve. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a witness in my own case. And I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. That morning, with shaking hands, I picked up the phone and dialed the only person I trusted outside this house, Linda Chavez. I didn't know what I was about to unleash, but I knew one thing. I needed an ally, and I needed her now. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I waited for the line to connect. My heart hammered against my ribs, part of me terrified of speaking the words out loud. What if I was overreacting? What if I really was imagining things, like Emily and Mark wanted me to believe? But when Linda's calm, steady voice answered, a weight lifted from my chest. "Helen, it's been too long," she said warmly. I swallowed hard. "Linda, I need your help, and I don't know who else to turn to." Within an hour, she was at my door. Linda Chavez had always been the kind of woman who commanded a room without raising her voice. We had met years ago when Robert was alive. She was our neighbor then, and over time, I learned she was an attorney who specialized in elder law. She had since moved across town, but the friendship lingered. Now, seeing her standing in my living room with her briefcase in hand, I felt both relief and shame. I poured us tea, my hands shaking slightly as I spoke. "They're trying to take everything from me, Linda. My money, my house, even my right to make decisions. I found files in Emily's closet, documents with my name all over them, and I overheard them talking planning. They want guardianship." Linda leaned forward, her eyes sharp but compassionate. "Tell me exactly what you found." I described the box, the envelopes, the financial statements annotated in Mark's handwriting, and the guardianship petition. As I spoke, her expression hardened. "Helen, this isn't just betrayal. It's elder financial abuse, and if Mark's involved, it's calculated. He knows exactly what he's doing." I felt my throat tighten. Hearing her say it aloud made it real. "So I'm not losing my mind?" Her voice was firm. "No, they want you to doubt yourself. That's how control starts. But you're here, clear-headed, telling me details. That's not the mind of someone incompetent. That's the mind of someone under attack." Tears burned in my eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness, they were tears of validation. For weeks, I had felt like I was drowning alone. Now, for the first time, someone was throwing me a rope. Linda opened her briefcase and pulled out a notepad. "We need to build your defense before they file anything in court. First, document everything. Every check you wrote, every payment, every errand you handled on your own. Second, collect witnesses, friends, neighbors, anyone who can vouch for your mental clarity. Third, secure your finances. Change passwords, close joint access, and lock down your accounts. Do it today." Her words were like marching orders, each one a step away from fear and toward action. That evening, Emily came home to find me at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. She paused in the doorway, her smile tight. "What are you working on, Mom?" I forced a casual tone. "Just organizing old bills, cleaning up, you know." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "You don't need to stress yourself with all that. Mark and I can handle it." I think I'm perfectly capable," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes stayed cold. "Of course." She left the room, but I could feel her suspicion hanging in the air like smoke. Later that night, When the house was quiet, I sat at my desk and began making a list of allies. Mrs. Patel, she could speak to my clarity. The women from my garden club, they knew I was active and social. Even the pharmacist, Mr. Harris, might realize he had been manipulated into signing something against me. The more names I wrote, the stronger I felt. Linda called me before bed. "I've seen too many cases like yours," she said softly. "Children or their spouses who see aging parents not as people but as opportunities. But you're not powerless, Helen. You're stronger than you know." As I lay in bed, staring into the dark, I clung to her words. For the first time in weeks, I felt less like prey and more like a fighter preparing for battle. But strength alone wouldn't be enough, because, as Linda warned before we hung up, once Emily and Mark realized I had an ally, they wouldn't back down, they would double their efforts. And the storm was only beginning. The following week passed in a blur of tension. Every corner of the house felt hostile, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the poison of betrayal. I followed Linda's advice, changing passwords, securing my accounts, writing down every expense in detail that proved my independence. But even as I worked, I could sense Emily and Mark moving faster, as if they already knew I was no longer compliant. One evening, I overheard the phone ring in the living room while Emily thought I was asleep. I stood quietly in the hallway, listening as she answered. "Yes, Mr. Fisher," she whispered. "We have the paperwork ready. Mark says all we need is the medical affidavit, and then we can file for guardianship." My stomach turned to stone. Guardianship. They were already preparing the final step to legally declare me incompetent and take control of my entire life. I leaned against the wall, my knees weak. They're not just talking. They're acting. The next morning, I went to the pharmacy for a refill of vitamins. Mr. Harris, the pharmacist, looked at me strangely as he handed over the bag. His voice hesitated. "Mrs. Carter, everything's okay, right?" I frowned. "Of course. Why do you ask?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, your daughter said you've been having trouble keeping track of medications. She asked me to sign a form to confirm it." A chill shot through me. "What form?" He lowered his eyes. "Something about medication mismanagement. I didn't think much of it, but, well, she seemed concerned." I clenched the bag so tightly my knuckles whitened. They were dragging my pharmacist into their scheme, twisting his trust into false evidence. "Mr. Harris," I said firmly, "I don't take prescription drugs. Only vitamins. You know that." His eyes widened. "You're right. I didn't realize." His cheeks flushed with guilt. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I'll set the record straight if needed." I nodded, my heart pounding. It was happening faster than I imagined. They were gathering allies, shaping a story where I was the confused, unstable mother in need of control. That night, at dinner, the mask slipped even further. Mark carved the roast chicken with exaggerated politeness, but his words dripped with venom. "Mom, you've seemed forgetful lately. Didn't you misplace your bank card last week?" Emily's fork paused mid-air, and she glanced at me with feigned concern. "Yes, I noticed that too. Maybe it's just age, but we should keep an eye on it." The nerve of them. I hadn't misplaced anything. Mark had borrowed the card to pay a bill without asking, and I had confronted him about it. Now he was twisting the incident into proof of my supposed decline. My voice cut through the room like glass. "I didn't misplace anything. You took it, Mark." His eyes flickered with irritation, but his smile never faltered. "Now, Helen, let's not confuse things." "Confuse?" I snapped. "I know what I saw, and I know what you're doing." The room fell silent. Emily set her fork down slowly, her face pale. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me like a predator sizing up prey. Finally, Emily whispered, "Mom, maybe you should rest. You're getting worked up." Rest, that word again, as though I were a fragile child needing supervision. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I am not confused, I am not weak, and I will not be erased from my own life." I left the table, my hands trembling, but my resolve like iron. Upstairs, I locked my bedroom door and leaned against it, my breath ragged. They were closing in. Every move I made, every word I spoke, was ammunition for their case. Later that night, I called Linda, my voice shaking. "They're moving faster than we thought. They've got paperwork, a lawyer, and even Mr. Harris. What do I do?" Her answer was calm, measured. We fight harder. I'll contact doctor. More for a cognitive evaluation, you'll pass it easily, and we'll gather witnesses. But Helen, you must be careful. They'll try to bait you into outbursts, anything they can twist into evidence. Stay calm, no matter what. I swallowed hard, staring out the window at the darkened street. Calm. That was the last thing I felt. But I knew she was right. If I lost my temper, they would use it against me. Still, as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the gnawing fear that by the time the truth came out, Emily and Mark would already have dragged me into court, and by then, it might be too late. The morning after my call with Linda, I woke before sunrise. The house was still, the kind of quiet that feels almost dangerous. I slipped from bed, brewed strong coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. Pages of numbers, dates, and memories lay scattered before me like weapons waiting to be drawn. Linda's words echoed in my mind. They'll try to bait you into outbursts. Stay calm. Build your case. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. This was no longer about suspicion or intuition. This was a fight for my freedom, for my dignity. I began organizing my evidence into a binder. Receipts for bills I'd paid, bank statements showing my transfers to Emily and Mark, letters from my garden club confirming my active participation, and even appointment cards from my doctor showing a clean bill of health. Each sheet of paper felt like a brick in the wall I was building between myself and their accusations. By mid-morning, Linda arrived, her expression composed but fierce. She spread her files across my dining table like a general laying out a battle plan. We're ahead of them for now, she said, but not by much. They've already got a lawyer, and they're moving fast. We need to strike first with proof of your competence. She pulled out a form. This is Dr. Karen Moore's cognitive evaluation. I've booked you for tomorrow morning. She's the best in the state. If you're as sharp as I know you are, you'll score above average, and we'll have documented proof. I nodded, my heart pounding. And the witnesses? I'm contacting them, Linda said. Mrs. Patel, your garden club friends, even Mr. Harris. Once he realized he'd been misled, he was eager to help. Relief flickered through me at the thought of Mr. Harris reversing his statement. Will that be enough? It's a start, she replied. But you also need to stop any automatic transfers to Emily and Mark. Cut off their access completely. The sooner you do, the sooner you're protected. He hesitated. Cutting off the money felt like severing the last thread between me and my daughter. But then I remembered the box, the guardianship petition, the secret photo of me in my garden. That wasn't love. That was exploitation. I squared my shoulders. I'll do it today. Linda smiled faintly, a glint of pride in her eyes. Good. We'll go to the bank together. It's safer that way. That afternoon, we drove in silence. I stared out the window, watching familiar streets blur past, my stomach twisting with a mix of grief and determination. When we arrived at the bank, the young teller recognized me. For years, she'd seen me make transfers to Emily and Mark without question. Now she looked surprised when I said, I need to cancel every automatic payment and remove all outside access to my accounts effective immediately. Her fingers hesitated on the keyboard. Are you sure, Mrs. Carter? You've been doing this for years. Yes, I said firmly. It's my money, and from now on, I'll decide where it goes. As I signed the forms, a strange sensation washed over me, not fear, but release. It was as if invisible chains were snapping one by one. Back home, I changed every password. Bank accounts, email, social media, even the Wi-Fi. Each keystroke felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. I wrote the new passwords on a slip of paper and locked it in my safe. For the first time in months, I felt the faint flicker of control returning. But the victory was bittersweet. As evening fell, Emily came home and found me at the kitchen table, my binder open and papers neatly stacked. Her smile was brittle. You've been busy. I met her gaze evenly. I have. She glanced at the binder, then back at me. Mark thinks you're making things harder than they have to be. You could just let us help. Help? I said quietly. That's what you call this? Her lips pressed together, but she said nothing. She turned and walked upstairs, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. I sat in silence long after she disappeared, the weight of what I had done settling over me. Cutting off the money wasn't just a financial decision, it was a declaration of independence. And I knew Emily and Mark would see it that way too. Linda had warned me, once they realize you're fighting back, they'll double their efforts. As I closed the binder and placed it in the safe, a shiver ran through me. I had drawn my line in the sand. The question now wasn't whether they would retaliate, it was how soon and how hard. I went to bed that night with my heart pounding, knowing that by morning, Emily and Mark would discover their gravy train had stopped and their next move would be brutal. The next morning, the storm broke. I had barely poured my first cup of coffee when the front door banged open. Emily stormed in, her face pale with fury, Mark trailing behind her like a shadow, sharpening the blade. She slammed her purse on the counter so hard that the dishes rattled. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "The bank called. The transfer stopped. The accounts are locked. Tell me you didn't—" I set my cup down deliberately, my hands steady, even though my heart thundered in my chest. "Yes, I did. It's my money, Emily. And from now on, it stays with me." Mark stepped forward, his expression controlled but his voice icy. "That's a mistake, Helen. A serious mistake." I forced myself to meet his gaze. "No, Mark. The mistake was letting you into this family and pretending you had my daughter's best interests at heart." Emily's breath caught. "Mom, how can you say that after everything we've done for you?" The words hit me like a slap. I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done for me? I've drained my savings, my retirement, my life, so you could have everything. Tuition, mortgage, car loans, dinners, gifts, you name it. And you call that helping me?" Her face flushed crimson. She glanced at Mark, who gave her the slightest nod. She straightened her shoulders, and her tone shifted calmer, colder, rehearsed. "Mom, this is exactly what we're worried about. You're not thinking clearly. You're confused, paranoid. We just want to make sure you're safe." There it was, the script, the narrative they had been building for weeks. I stood, every muscle in my body taut. "No, Emily, I am not confused. I am not paranoid. I see everything perfectly clearly now. You and Mark are trying to erase me from my own life." Mark's voice cut in, smooth and poisonous. "If you insist on going down this path, we'll have no choice but to involve the courts. Guardianship is designed to protect people like you, Helen. People who can't protect themselves." Something inside me snapped. My voice rose, strong and unshakable. "Protect me? Don't twist the word. This isn't protection, it's theft, and I will fight you with everything I have." The air in the room thickened. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Emily's eyes filled with tears. But I had learned by now not to trust them. She whispered, "Mom, if you do this, you'll destroy our family." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, Emily. You already destroyed it the moment you decided money mattered more than love." Her tears dried as quickly as they had come. Her expression hardened. "Fine. Then you've chosen war." She grabbed her purse, Mark's hand already on her arm, guiding her toward the door. He turned back once, his smile sharp as glass. "We'll see you in court, Helen." The door slammed shut behind them, the sound reverberating through the house like a gunshot. I collapsed into a chair, my body trembling. For years, I had imagined confrontation with Emily as something heartbreaking, filled with shouting and tears. But this was cold, calculated, and worse, it was only the beginning. I reached for the phone and dialed Linda. She answered on the second ring. "They know," I said, my voice shaking. "They know I cut them off. They came here, threatened me. They're going to file for guardianship." Linda's voice was calm, steady as always. "Good. Let them. Because now we're ready. You have your binder, your witnesses, and tomorrow we'll have Dr. Moore's evaluation. They think they're building a case, but what they're really doing is walking into a trap of their own making." Her confidence steadied me, but the ache in my chest lingered. I stared at the old photo on the wall, Emily as a child, her gap-toothed grin lighting up the frame. My heart broke all over again. How had we come to this? Yet even in the grief, a strange fire burned inside me. For the first time, I wasn't running or apologizing. I wasn't shrinking. I was standing tall, facing the storm head-on. That night, I packed a small bag with essentials, important papers, the binder, even the old locket Robert had given me. If Emily and Mark wanted to drag me into court, I would not arrive as a victim. I would arrive as a woman ready to fight. As I zipped the bag shut, I whispered into the quiet room, You wanted war? You'll get war. But I couldn't shake the chilling thought, what if they struck before I could even reach the courtroom? The day of the hearing arrived with a cold edge in the air. I barely slept the night before, my mind rehearsing questions and answers, memories of betrayal colliding with the strength Linda told me to hold on to. At dawn, I dressed carefully in a navy suit that had hung in my closet since Robert's funeral. I pinned his silver brooch to the lapel, a small spark of light to remind me I was still someone's beloved, not just a mother to be used and discarded. Linda arrived promptly, her presence as steadying as always. "Remember," she said as we drove, "stay calm, answer directly, and let them show their greed. The judge will see through it." When we reached the courthouse, the building loomed above me, all stone and shadow. My legs trembled as I walked through the metal detector, but I straightened my back. I wasn't walking in as a victim, I was walking in as a woman who had finally said enough. Inside the courtroom, I saw Emily and Mark seated at the petitioner's table, their lawyer, Mr. Fisher, a man with slicked-back hair and a polished smile, shuffling through papers. Emily wouldn't look at me. Mark did, his stare sharp, triumphant, as if he already believed victory was his. Linda leaned toward me. "Don't give him the satisfaction of fear. We're ready." The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Harper entered. He was a man in his 60s, stern-eyed but not unkind, the kind of judge who had seen far too many families torn apart by greed. He surveyed the room before motioning for the proceedings to begin. Mr. Fisher rose first, his voice smooth, dripping with false concern. "Your Honor, this case is about protection. My clients, Emily Carter and her husband Mark Taylor, are deeply worried about Mrs. Carter's declining mental health. She has exhibited paranoia, erratic financial decisions, and increasing isolation. Guardianship is not a punishment, it's a safeguard." As he spoke, Emily dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Mark rested a hand protectively on her shoulder. The performance was perfect. For anyone who didn't know the truth, it would have been convincing. But Linda was prepared. When Mr. and nu sadian 11 of the rinwan hudalan in detenik. Fisher finished, she rose, her voice firm and unwavering. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of decline, it's a case of exploitation. For years, Mrs. Carter sacrificed her savings to support her daughter and son-in-law, over $33,000 in 3 years. And when she finally said enough, they retaliated by fabricating a narrative of incompetence. This is not protection, this is manipulation." "Oh." The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing from one side of the courtroom to the other. "Proceed with evidence," he said. Emily was the first to testify. She clutched her tissue, voice quivering. "My mother has changed. She forgets things. She accuses us of stealing. She even installed cameras because she believes we're plotting against her. I just want her to be safe." Linda stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Taylor, when was the last time you called your mother without asking for financial help?" Emily froze, lips parting. "I don't remember." "And isn't it true," Linda pressed, "that you told her she wasn't a VIP at your own wedding?" Emily's cheeks flushed. "That was taken out of context." "What context?" Linda shot back. "Justifies excluding a mother from her only child's wedding day?" Emily faltered, her tears suddenly looking less convincing. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Next came Mark. He spoke with confidence, insisting I was paranoid, that I had accused him of theft, that my behavior was irrational. But when Linda asked, "Mr. Taylor, how much money have you and your wife received from Helen Carter in the last 3 years?" He hesitated. "I don't know the exact amount," he muttered. "Would over $33,000 sound correct?" Linda asked, lifting a binder. Mark's jaw tightened. "Maybe. $33,000 from a woman you claim cannot manage her finances. Isn't it convenient that her supposed incompetence always benefited you?" The judge's expression hardened. Mark looked down at the table, his confidence cracking. Then it was my turn. My legs trembled as I walked to the stand, but when I swore to tell the truth, something inside me steadied. Linda's voice guided me gently. "Mrs. Carter, why did you stop supporting your daughter and son-in-law financially?" I met the judge's gaze. "Because I realized I wasn't a mother to them anymore. I was a bank account. I gave $33,000 in 3 years money meant for my retirement, for my security. And when I stopped, they didn't ask how I was. They asked how much more I could give." That's not love, Your Honor. That's exploitation. Mr. Fisher leapt to his feet for cross-examination. Mrs. Carter, didn't you install cameras in your home because you believed your daughter was out to get you? I took a deep breath. No, I installed cameras because she and her husband entered my home without permission, rifling through my documents. That's not paranoia. That's protection. A hush fell over the room. I stepped down from the stand with my head held high. For the first time in months, I felt strong. I wasn't begging for love. I wasn't apologizing. I was telling the truth. As I returned to my seat, I saw Emily's face tighten, Mark's hand gripping hers with visible force. They weren't defeated yet, but I had cracked their facade. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time I believed I might actually win. The courtroom was heavy with silence as I returned to my seat. My heart pounded, but I held my head high. Emily avoided my gaze, staring at the table as though the wood grain might swallow her whole. Mark, on the other hand, glared at me with a cold fury, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. Judge Harper cleared his throat. We will hear from the remaining witnesses. Linda called Mrs. Patel to the stand first. The older woman walked carefully, her sari bright against the drab courtroom walls. She adjusted her glasses and smiled at me before facing the judge. Mrs. Patel, Linda began, how long have you known Helen Carter? Over 15 years, she replied firmly. We garden together, attend book club, and share tea almost every week. And in that time, Linda asked, have you ever found her confused, forgetful, or incapable of handling herself? Mrs. Patel shook her head. Never. She is sharp. Just last month, she taught me how to prune roses in a way I'd never thought of. We talk politics, books, recipes, you name it. If this woman is incompetent, then so am I. The courtroom chuckled softly. Even Judge Harper's lips twitched. Next came Mr. Harris, the pharmacist. His face was pale as he took the oath. I could see the guilt in his eyes when he glanced at me. Mr. Harris, Linda began gently, did Emily Carter or Mark Taylor ask you to sign a form regarding my client's medication? He nodded reluctantly. Yes, they said it was for insurance, but later I realized it implied she was mismanaging prescriptions. And was that true? No, he said quickly. Mrs. Carter only buys vitamins and aspirin. She doesn't take prescriptions. I regret signing anything. I was misled. Mark shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but Mr. Harris held firm. Finally, 2 members of my garden club testified, confirming I was active, social, and mentally sharp. Each word chipped away at the lies Emily and Mark had tried to weave. When the witnesses finished, Judge Harper called for closing arguments. Mr. Fisher rose first, his voice dripping with polished concern. Your Honor, no one doubts Mrs. Carter's love for her daughter. But love cannot erase reality. She has displayed paranoia installing cameras, accusing her family of theft. She's isolating herself, cutting off financial support without warning. These are signs of decline. Guardianship will ensure her safety and stability. His words rang hollow now, rehearsed and transparent. Still, my pulse raced as Linda stood. She placed her hands on the table, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, what we've seen today is not decline, it's defiance. Defiance against exploitation. Mrs. Carter is not confused. She is not paranoid. She is a woman who gave $33,000 to her daughter and son-in-law, only to be repaid with betrayal. When she finally said enough, they tried to silence her with guardianship. If this court grants their petition, it will send a message that any adult child can strip a parent of dignity the moment the checks stop. That is not justice. That is theft disguised as care. The courtroom was silent. Even Emily looked shaken, her tissue forgotten in her hand. Judge Harper leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I will take this under advisement and deliver my ruling shortly. He rose, and the bailiff called for a recess. As people filed out, Emily suddenly turned to me. Her eyes glistened, but her voice was laced with venom. You'll regret this, Mom. Even if you win, you'll regret it. I stared at her, my chest aching with both love and fury. No, Emily. The only regret I have is that you chose greed over family. Mark tugged her arm, leading her out of the courtroom. I watched them go, my heart breaking all over again. For years I had dreamed of watching Emily thrive, of seeing her happy, of being part of her future. Instead, I was sitting in a courtroom, fighting to keep her from taking my life away. I sat back down, hands trembling. Linda squeezed my shoulder. You were perfect. You told the truth. That's all that matters now. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. Judges were human. They could be swayed by performance, by tears, by polished lies. What if my truth wasn't enough? The minutes dragged like hours until the bailiff called us back in. My legs shook as I stood, but I walked tall. The room fell silent as Judge Harper returned to the bench, his robe rustling. He glanced at me, then at Emily and Mark. "This court has reviewed the evidence," he began, his voice grave. My breath caught in my throat. In the next few seconds, my future, my freedom would be decided. Would I walk out of this courtroom whole, or would my own daughter succeed in erasing me? The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, as Judge Harper shuffled his papers. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on me, then on Emily and Mark, before he spoke. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. The petitioners allege incompetence, citing paranoia and erratic financial behavior. However," he paused, his voice steady, deliberate, "the evidence tells a different story." My heart thudded so loudly I thought the whole room could hear it. "Mrs. Carter has provided documentation of financial support totaling more than $33,000 to her daughter and son-in-law in the last 3 years. This shows not incompetence but extraordinary sacrifice. Witnesses testified to her clarity, her active social life, and her independence. Furthermore, a licensed physician has submitted a cognitive evaluation, confirming that Mrs. Carter's mental faculties are above average for her age." He turned his gaze to Emily and Mark. "On the other hand, we have testimony of misrepresentation and manipulation attempts to portray Mrs. Carter as unstable when she is not. This court will not reward exploitation." The room seemed to freeze. I dared not breathe. "Therefore," Judge Harper continued, his voice firm, "the petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Carter is fully competent to manage her own affairs. Additionally, this court recommends that the actions of the petitioners be reviewed for potential financial abuse." The gavel struck, sharp and final. For a moment I sat stunned, as though the words hadn't truly landed. Then relief surged through me so strong it stole my breath. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of freedom. I looked at Emily. Her face was pale, her lips parted in shock. Mark sat stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched, his fists balled on the table. For once his smooth mask had cracked. Slowly, I rose to my feet. My legs trembled, but I stood tall. I wasn't just a widow, or a mother, or a victim of betrayal. I was myself again. Linda leaned close and whispered, "You did it, Helen. You won." "Oh." As we gathered our papers, Emily finally looked at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of rage and something else, shame, perhaps, though it flickered only briefly before anger returned. She mouthed the words, "This isn't over." My chest ached, but I refused to let her see weakness. "It is over," I whispered back, "because I'm not afraid of you anymore." Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was crisp, the sky wide and blue above me. I inhaled deeply, savoring the freedom in my lungs. For years I had bent under the weight of sacrifice, of trying to buy love with money, of shrinking myself to keep peace. But standing there, I realized I didn't need their approval, their gratitude, or their permission. I was free because I had chosen myself. Reporters lingered on the steps, but I ignored their questions. This wasn't a story for headlines, it was my life, my survival. As Linda drove me home, the weight that had pressed on my shoulders for so long finally lifted. When I walked through my front door, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like mine again. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, these were no longer signs of loneliness, but of peace. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat at my table, and opened the binder one last time. The papers that once represented fear now felt like proof of resilience. I closed it with a soft snap, placed it on the shelf, and whispered, "It's done." Yet even as relief washed over me, a small voice in the back of my mind lingered. Family wounds cut deeper than legal battles. Winning in court was one thing, but could I ever heal the scar my daughter had carved into my heart? In the weeks after the trial, my world slowly began to breathe again. For the first time in years, I woke each morning without dread, without the fear of what Emily and Mark might do next. My accounts were secure, the locks on my doors strong, and my dignity once so fragile felt untouchable. I returned to the things I had long abandoned. Saturday mornings with my garden club, laughing with friends who had stood by me. Quiet evenings painting sunsets, a hobby I had pushed aside for emergencies that were never mine. Even walking through the park felt different, the air fresher, the colors brighter. I visited Robert's grave one afternoon, bringing fresh lilies. "I almost lost myself," I whispered, brushing leaves from the headstone. "But I found my way back. I hope you'd be proud." Emily has not spoken to me since that day in court. Part of me still aches for the daughter I once knew, the little girl who begged me not to leave her side after nightmares. But I have accepted that I cannot buy back her love, nor should I try. Love built on manipulation is not love at all. I am Helen Carter. I survived betrayal, humiliation, and an attempt to erase me from my own life. But I stood tall, and I fought back. And now, I am free. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs strength today. Subscribe to our channel for more family betrayal stories, because the truth is, none of us should ever trade dignity for affection. Your story matters, and sometimes the fight for yourself is the bravest fight of all.